Diablo 4 just had its dev live stream, and oh boy, we got a ton to talk about with that. I also got to talk about some stealth mechanics and some stuff in Season 1 that you might not be aware about, and a few warnings with using certain items and different things inside Season 1 mechanic. I'm also going to give my thoughts on the Season 1 and the Season 1 mechanic after reaching level 51. We got a lot to talk about. What's up, World Tribute? Back in the video, we're checking out all things Diablo 4. Okay, so first up, let's just jump into some of the hidden Season 1 mechanics, as well as some things the game doesn't tell you, and some of those warnings, just so that you don't make mistakes like I did. So first up, the biggest one. There is actually no confirmation when using your deluxe voucher on the battle pass. They clearly just wanted you to hit the button, and the button's right there. I heard console players have a really hard time avoiding it because it's the first option that you're selected on. I also wanted to activate the paid battle pass, but I didn't want to activate my accelerated battle pass. I thought that was an option. I thought I could just get the battle pass free and then use my accelerated battle pass on another battle pass. However, I guess it does make sense that you're only paying for the one. Also, from what I saw, I didn't have the option to buy the battle pass separately and then use my accelerated on a future one. So it was kind of a waste here, and I'm like level 40 something on the battle pass or something like that. Also with the battle pass, with the cinders, the smoldering cinders, they actually did a good job on not making it pay to win, quote unquote, and you won't probably ever need to skip tiers, essentially because of the way that the smoldering tiers are put on the battle pass. However, eventually maybe into the 90s you will, because we do have some smoldering powers at 98 and the battle pass is at that higher level too. We'll have to wait and see on all that. However, with the smoldering ashes, you can actually refund those. So no matter what smoldering ashes you earn, if you go ahead and place it in XP, which I would recommend everybody to do off the bat, place your first 4 ashes into the XP tab. That's going to be a 12% additional XP bonus. You can actually refund those smoldering cinders. I don't think it tells you anywhere, but you just have to right click, or I would assume it's maybe a back button or a Y button on console. Not sure what it would be. Maybe one of you guys can comment down below and let people know what it is. However, on PC, I just right click the little tab thing and it brings up that I can refund my smoldering cinders for some gold. It's super cheap. I think it was like 100 gold. So yeah, go ahead, use your smoldering cinders and use them on XP right away is at least what I would do. Now time to go over that actual dev live stream and the campfire chat, as well as some of the details in 1.1 that aren't being talked about. Now, we had a few major things there, like they're adding on the stash tab. They're also going to be nerfing nightmare dungeons, the difficulty of them. Really don't know if I think that's the play or not. I think that they should nerf some mechanics within the nightmare dungeons. We'll have to wait and see. Those patch notes are supposed to be coming out way later today. I'll put an updated comment down below once those patch notes do drop. We did have a comment here that I did kind of find a little bit drastic and kind of concerning, and a Reddit user also pointed this out. Basically, they talked about that nightmare dungeons have taken on a strange form of players testing their power and pushing for higher sigil levels instead of using it as a leveling system, which I guess their intended mechanic for nightmare dungeons was to be used as a 50 to level 100 leveling mechanic. However, just like the post here says, that means there is no endgame content. At least that's what we're to assume, is that there is no endgame loop at all. There's nothing to do for endgame, maybe Uber Lilith. It is a bit odd that there's not any endgame, or that the mechanic that is supposed to be, or what players assumed was the endgame mechanic, is actually not an endgame mechanic at all. Honestly surprised the game released this way and in this state. Really, there is no excuse for it. They also had a ton of comments on vulnerable damage and nerfing vulnerable stuff, and they of course know that it is multiplicative. However, if they know that it's multiplicative and they know that nerfing it is only nerfing everybody's player power across the board, and vulnerability is a forced stat, then why do it unless they wanted to just nerf player power overall? Seems like they wanted that to be the case, and we have a post here as well that highlights that. If vulnerable damage is such a headache, remove it. I don't know if that's the option. They might as well remove all the other stats, the other boring stats. I think the statistics in the game, the itemization in the game, is really bad. Probably one of the worst aspects of the game. The damage to close enemies, critical strike damage, critical strike chance. Those items are really boring, especially for an ARPG, like incredibly boring. They feel really, really uninspired. When I go play WoW, Classic, or even Baldur's Gate 3, and I get an item drop in an early level of Classic WoW, or even in Baldur's Gate 3 Early Access, there's a ton of items that feel really impactful. Some really cool stuff that adds to saving throws and action abilities. Stuff that even gives me abilities for not my class, which feels really cool to have stuff from other classes on other classes and then utilize together. Whereas Diablo 4 just doesn't really have that. We just have these like boring, uninspired stats that we all are forced to take into these cookie cutter builds. And we also have a fair warning about some some Season 1 builds and mechanics there, and that is to do with the Cage Heart of Frozen Terror. Essentially, it's supposed to apply a fear to monsters, but it also fears yourself. So when you have this on, you actually also end up fearing yourself and not just the enemies. There's also some other broken hearts like the one that gives wolves. However, the Druid Wolves, is what's happening essentially is that when you're in town, that heart doesn't actually apply or showcase until you get into a combat scenario. It's like a bit of a bug there with that one. Also, the Sorcerer heart that adds resistances. They clearly know that resistances aren't really utilized and are basically a useless stat. Not sure why they added it as a heart for Sorcerer, especially when the class is already struggling. They could have added the filler to another class. I mean, it's clearly a filler, and a lot of these 32 hearts that they keep promoting are a lot of fillers, which is fine in games. I think that's fine and dandy, but they really don't spice up the game enough. Which brings me on to my next point here, and we have another post here as well. I expected the season to have a bigger impact on the world. I completely agree. I actually power leveled Season 1, regrettably power leveled it. Last night, I got to level 51. I stayed up to like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Power leveled a ton. I tried to get my build running right. There's a lot of issues on Sorcerer getting that leveling build running right. Ton of mana issues and that stuff there. But regardless, just as they pointed out, there's just not a lot here with the seasonal mechanic. And I'm finding myself barely, if ever, interacting with it. I got all the way to level 51, which is decently high, I think. And I interacted with the seasonal mechanic twice. So that was kind of insane. I've gotten like 4 hearts total, 4 or 5 hearts total. I barely, if ever, see them. Even when I solo farmed all the way to 35, and then I grouped farmed thereafter, yeah, I barely, if ever, saw the seasonal mechanic, and I was doing nightmare dungeons as well at the end of the night. Another post pointed out here, the seasonal mechanic is so bland, I'd rather we had a bunch of quality of life instead. Yeah, I definitely agree. I'm not sure what they expected from this. It doesn't make the game any more fun. I'll be 100% honest, I had probably the most boring time playing yesterday. The entire time I wanted to get off the game, but I knew I kind of needed to level up and understand the mechanic in the game fundamentally. Especially if I want to make content around games, I want to understand them fundamentally. I don't want to look at a page. I want to play the game myself so I can get the actual ideal of what is going on inside the game. I get a lot of times that I'm just reading off Reddit posts here, but 99.9% of the time, I agree with the Reddit post that's being made. That's why I'm bringing it up, and the reason why I'm using a Reddit post is so that it can be elaborated as just not to my anecdotal evidence. And that allows me to be selective when I'm picking certain posts or things to talk about. Now then again, I also want to bring up the polar opposites and things of people that like the game or what they want improved or what they think is already good. And as another post here highlights, so basically 1.1 was half a patch. They said that they wanted Nightmare 100 dungeons to have the nerf that they included that is going to be in the hotfix today. However, why wouldn't they have just delayed the season 1 day? My guess is that these changes wouldn't have been implemented for a couple weeks. However, they're rushing them forward because of the outcry and the drastic sort of postings and the Metacritic dropping that's been happening with the game as of late. So does Season 1 save Diablo at all? No. No, in fact, I think it makes the game actually objectively worse. I don't think we're going to see any major improvements to this game for many years. And that includes the 1 stash tab that they're going to give up. Which is pretty insane that we're only going to get 1 new stash tab. Clearly, they either want to include this stash tab in a seasonal mechanic, battle pass, which is my assumption that stash tabs are going to be in the battle pass, either the paid tier or the free tier. My guess is that the free tier has 1 or 2 stash tabs and the paid tier has 1 or 2 as well. That's the reason why they're being so conservative on only adding the 1 stash tab. That was honestly most of the stream and everything that's been kind of talked about recently. Will I continue playing Season 1? Probably, but not to the extent that I did last night. But that should about cover for today's video. If you like, and subscribe, and until the next one. Deuces.